Hello, and welcome back to my video series on how to use Google SketchUp. In today's lesson, we'll learn how to use the pull/push tool, how to draw lines on 3D objects, and how to use the eraser tool.
Okay, so last time we talked about how to use the measurement and putting specific values into making a specifically sized object, and then we also talked about putting specific points on lines to create shapes within shapes. So next is we're going to talk a little bit basically how to make this 2D object into a 3D object. And we're going to use a new tool called the Extrusion Tool. So if we go to the left hand side tool panel, we can go to this tool right here that is shown as push and pull. In SketchUp it's called push and pull. In other CAD modeling software it's also called extrusions, but it basically does the same thing. So we can go ahead and select it, and then we can select this one over here that says push/pull at the very top. And we can see our cursor now is this little flat little plate with an arrow pointing up. What this allows us to do is basically select any surface on here, and that allows us to basically create a 3D object from that surface. So the next thing that we actually want to do beforehand is we actually want to rotate this because we're going to start working in 3D objects. We can move our projection or the thing that we're seeing so that we can actually see 3D objects rather than like a 2D surface. So what you can do is either choose the orbiting tool from down here and then manually move it so that you can kind of get a 3D perspective like so. Or you can go ahead and go to the standard projection views over on the right hand side and then select one of the 3D views, and which will allow us to kind of look at the object in certain 3D spaces. It's either one is your preference in terms of like what you want to look at. So once we do that, the only other thing that we want to do is actually go back to our selection tool, and we want to select, let's say, this surface right here. And once we select it, it kind of goes from this gray shape into this gray shape with like a light blue hint to it with these little dots on the surface. We actually want to right click, and then we actually want to go down here where it says reverse faces. This is out of just using SketchUp over a long time. Whenever you create a 3D model or 3D object from a 2D surface, we want to make sure that this surface is actually a kind of like a whitish color like this. And it'll make extruding and pushing, pulling objects a little bit easier. So we'll go back to the push and pull tool, select this, and then what we can do is pull it up like so. So you just go to the surface and pull it up and just move the mouse up. And you can see I'm now creating a kind of like a 3D object from that 2D plane. And just like with the line tool, we can specify specifically how much we want to pull up the object. So this square right in the corner right here, we made it so it was about 25 by 25 millimeters. So let's say we want to make a perfect cube that was 25 by 25 by 25 millimeters. What we can do is just type in the number 25 right here and then hit enter. And what that does, it makes this perfect cube right here that's the same dimensions. So if I go to the orbiting tool and just kind of move around, you can see how this is like 3D object pulled from that 2D surface. You can also see that the surface is white right here, which means that it was extruded it in the right way. You can also see all the other lines from everything that we did from before is still positioned down there. We haven't pulled those into 3D objects. But it's also interesting to note that line that was on the side of this right here, that little point, it actually created a line on the surface of the cube. So just like in the same way that we created specific points and lines on a 2D surface in our previous lesson, you can also do the same thing on 3D objects, but you're only working on a specific surface of the object. So let's look at that a little bit more closely. If we go to this line tool right here again, we just select it, we can create lines on top of any surface of the 3D object. So let's look at this surface right here. Let's say we wanted to create a midpoint right here. If we wanted to create a line from there, we can select it, and then we can again move it across. And as long as we don't move it too far up or too far down, we can keep it parallel to the green plane or the green axis, and it'll make sure it's making sure it has sharp 90-degree corners and makes it a rectangle. We just drag it over and select it on the endpoint over here on the edge of the cube, and it creates basically another shape on top of that surface right there. So now let's go to our orbit tool and kind of pan the, or kind of orbit the object so that it looks a little bit on the top, like that. So we can start working a little bit on there, but it still gives it a 3D perspective. So we go back to our line tool and we can do the same thing. We can select the point where that line was before, and we can drag it across, and let's say we want to drag it to about 15 millimeters. We go ahead, again, making sure that the line is red, meaning it's parallel to the red axis. Type in the number 15 and hit enter, and it creates a line that's 15 millimeters long from that edge of the cube. Saying let's repeat the same process, and I'm not exactly sure how far up the line is from this point right here to the edge over here, but we can just move it up towards it, and if we get close to it, you can see it kind of snaps onto the edge, and it tells you it's on the edge by that little text box right there. We can select it and it'll create another point right there, and it creates a line and a new kind of shape. So again, let's go back to the orbit tool, we'll select it, and now we kind of want to move it over a little bit so that we can see the other surface, the little flat surface that doesn't have any markings on it so far. And then let's kind of repeat the same process what we've been doing. We can select this line right here, and we'll go ahead and select the endpoint where that line we created from the first line when we made the 3D object. We can select it and move it across. And you remember that line that we drew was 15 millimeters? We can do it again. We can say 15 millimeters and hit enter. And it will make a line that's 15 millimeters, the same length as this line up here. And then what we can do finally is we can just drag this line from this endpoint all the way to the top of the other one. And the nice thing is, because we are now moving along the z-axis, just the same way how if we made sure the lines were parallel along the green axis, the red axis, it changed that color. The same thing will happen here. As long as we see that blue line, that means we're parallel to the blue axis. So if we move away, move the mouse back and forth a little bit, you can see how it changes color, but we want to make sure it's blue in our case. So we can see that it creates a little wedge right here, a little cutout of that cube. And you can see it from this viewpoint right here. You can see how there's like a little cube that's been marked on top of this bigger cube right here. Another tool that I want to talk about really quickly is the erasing tool. So unlike the undoing tool that we talked about last time, the undoing tool really is like if we make a mistake and we want to just undo an action. The erasing tool is to like purposely remove lines or features from any of the things that we've drawn. So in our case, I kind of want to get rid of this line right here to make things a little bit more easier to see that there's like a little section of the cube cut out from the larger cube. So what I'm going to do is select the eraser tool, and then what you can do is go over here, and to make sure it's a little bit more accurate, I'm going to zoom in again by just pinching on the trackpad, or if you have a mouse you can use the scroll wheel to zoom in, or you can select the tool, zoom tool from over here. But if we select the eraser tool, you can go over to a line and then hit erase. And it might have been hard to see, but if you select it, it'll change a blue color regardless of what line it is, and it'll erase it. So now you can see it's just this lone little cutout right here. So going back to the extrusion tool or the push-pull tool, what we first saw was pulling the object, going from a 2D surface and pulling an object to a 3D object. You can also do the opposite, where you push away material to kind of create like a relief or a cutout in an object. So we can go back to the push and pull tool. It's the same one that we used before, and then we can select any one of these surfaces right here, and then we can kind of push it inwards. So like that. I'm just moving the mouse down in this case. If you're at the surface and you want to, let's say, push away material, what you actually have to do is put a negative or a minus sign in there so that you do that. So let's say we want to push away 5 millimeters of material. We type in -5 and then hit enter, and it'll go down. The other alternative is you can select that surface again, start pushing down, it doesn't matter how much you kind of push down, then you just have to type the number 5, and then it'll kind of just understand that you're pushing away material, and it'll do it for you. So you can see now there's a little stab edge created in this larger kind of structure right here. And it kind of showcases how to use the push and pull tool to create these 3D objects from 2D objects.